Presentation of the afternoon. We're lucky, very lucky to have Dr. Carl Berg with us. He's an assistant professor of biology at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley. He has his master's in science in biology from Florida International University in Miami, and then his doctorate in animal behavior from Cornell University. He teaches animal behavior, ornithology, and ecology. And his areas of interest are ornithology, behavioral ecology, acoustic communication, evolutionary development, psychobiology, and conservation biology. So I'm very looking forward to hearing about these things. Very welcome, and thank you for coming out here on a Saturday.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you didn't have too big of a lunch, and you might go to sleep. I won't be offended. Maybe I don't mean that it's soothing enough that you can go to sleep. So, anyway, I'm going to talk about mainly about parrots today, but I'll go into some other birds. So this is sort of a class, right? You have an exam at the end of the day.
No.
So, okay.
Multiple guesses.
Well, this is a little bit more about our research, but anyway, yeah, we found some sort of interesting relationships between how birds vocalize and how they fly, and the common denominator being the respiratory system. So I'll make a couple different references to that today. So, oops, there. Yeah, so as far as Barbara mentioned, I'm kind of big into behavior in birds, and two of the more celebrated behaviors in birds are the songs they make that we often get woken up to, and a lot of you use those to identify birds. And of course, we're all jealous that birds can fly. So these are pretty widespread behaviors in birds and satisfy many different functions. As I mentioned, both rely heavily on respiratory function, which is a horribly complicated process in birds. I don't know, they've got some pretty important, almost difficult for us to imagine being mammals, how their respiratory system works. So they've got a fixed volume lung, for example. We're used to ours expanding and contracting as we breathe. Birds' lungs don't expand or contract, and they've got up to 14 different air sacs. They're really like little air pillows. This is one thing that makes them good at flying, is they're like a little helium balloon. not quite. But anyway, all of these sacs are sort of talking to each other and coordinating, and they're pushing air through the lungs at a very high rate, which enables birds to actually get in flight and have the sort of energy that they would need. That's why we can hardly imagine flying. Anyway, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Both of these things, so how birds produce their songs and how they fly, are very complex physiological systems, and they're usually, with good reason, studied apart. I made the mistake of trying to merge them. They're also often studied in captivity. It's very hard to study physiology in the wild. But I got to thinking about this, and we sort of are amazed with both of these behaviors in and of themselves. But when birds combine them, it almost takes them to another level. And they're used in so many contexts. Communicating and moving around very quickly at the same time, I think, is kind of somewhat underappreciated. It's used for all sorts of things, coordinating birds to feeding areas when it's time to sleep. The more social birds sleep together. In the last talk with Javier, you heard about some amazing migratory feats of birds, and all that is coordinated with vocalizations, really. When I sort of got involved in this project, I thought back to one of my roommates in college, the first time I was in college, and this was probably like 1987, I think, and he got a phone in his car. And it was like, everybody was like, oh my gosh, this guy's got a phone in his car, and all of a sudden, You know, before that, you had to find a phone booth or get to a house, right? If there was an emergency or something, you forgot something in the office, you know, and all of a sudden this guy was able to sort of fix things, you know, on the road, on his way to class, and you know, 30 years later, who can doubt that it's really changed the way we live our lives, being able to communicate with our cell phones, and you know, so I think that it probably had a big impact on birds as well. Sorry, I didn't mean to put up the psycho-looking, looks kind of like a psycho killer or something, the Berg there. Bergs are small Australian parakeets, oftentimes referred to as parakeet. This is the typical, if you go into a pet store and ask for a parakeet, this is the one they'll give you, about $10. But anyway, they've done some very interesting physiology. So that's a sort of a gas mask that's on the front, and they train the birds to fly. And this is how they're able to sort of measure, you know, how fast their respiratory frequency, and you know how fast they pull in oxygen and so forth. Again, thinking back to all those air sacs, how complicated it is. Some really amazing work has been done on Bergs and some other species as well. And then again, sort of this other side of the biology of birds, they're vocalizing. I just played you a little clip here, one of my favorite demonstrations of just oops. One of my favorite demonstrations of how complex birds are, bird song and vocalizations. Focusing too loud.
Wow.
It's a little hard to read. So kind of a simple little song of the cardinal that we've all heard. Of course, it sounds a little different in Florida than in New York, than in Texas, because it learns its song. The other neat thing about cardinals and many songbirds is that and what they were sort of trying to show you there is that they're actually sort of independently working these air sacs. And so they're actually, you know, that cardinal song, the sound it has a certain special quality to it, as a lot of birdsong does. And you know, even when we try and whistle it, sometimes it doesn't come out quite right. One of the reasons is they're actually speaking or singing in stereo. Again, something we had a little bit of trouble comprehending. So they have two sides to their voice box, and they can sort of work these together in fabulous ways to make really, you know, kind of crazy sounds. So just an example again of how complex those two behaviors are. So now I'm going to tell you about some of our work in the llanos of Venezuela. It's actually ecologically, I'm always impressed with how similar it is to the sort of coastal prairies of South Texas. A lot of the water birds and even hawks and things that we have in Venezuela, we also have here in South Texas. This is a little hard to see, but this is a caiman, a little alligator, about the size of that one in the pond there. A spectacled caiman, and he's not doing the backstroke, nor is he taking a nap. A little hard to see, but he's being strangled by an anaconda. So the anaconda got him. This is their favorite fruit. I didn't believe this until I actually saw it. I'd heard about it, but until you see it, you know, it's just kind of hard to believe. It's gonna, like, it'll probably take a couple days to basically break every bone in its body. It's slowly squeezing the air out of its lungs. So it's a lovely place to work with these things swirling in the water beneath you at 5 in the morning when you're putting up this net. Yeah, you can. Sorry, the top of the screen is a little bit cut off, but you could actually see that you know, this area of South Texas and this area here actually kind of similar by the colors. So it's again a grassland or a savanna, a famous one in northern Venezuela. It's famous because it floods every year. Again, we have flooding, we have the hurricane and everything, but this place really floods every year. So the cattle ranches kind of turn into big lakes, and people go around in boats rather than on horses for half the year. So anyway, it's a pretty special place. So I've been working here for over 15 years now, and the thing that took me to it was my interest in parrots and the fact that there was a very interesting study of parrots going on. So on this ranch in Venezuela, I'd read about it for a long time. In fact, I was trying to write up some of my studies of parrots, and every time I would try and find some dumb little trait or attribute of parrots, and I would want to know if anybody knows anything about this. It would ultimately take me to this ranch in Venezuela, so I was kind of scratching my head and what's going on at this place? And anyway, finally I had an opportunity to visit, and found it pretty fascinating. So it's a large ranch. This is actually a small ranch in Venezuela, 14,000 acres, just to give you an idea. Some of the ranches are larger than small countries. But they also, to say it's a ranch is a little bit of a misnomer. These are some of the most amazing wildlife preserves in tropical savanna anyway. So they kind of double as wildlife preserves. So we have 120. I have to update this a little bit. We actually have over 200 now of these PVC pipes that are distributed around the ranch and usually set up on fence posts. And they're to attract the parrots to breed in. They have a hardware cloth lining that allows us to quickly extract the contents of the nest and measure the eggs, mark the eggs, measure the nestlings, mark the nestlings, do all sorts of stuff. It also is a pretty convenient setup to install audio-video technology inside the nest tubes and start to study some of the interesting things about early development in parrots, which is pretty poorly known. So anyway, this is the green-rumped parrotlet. This is the male. He's got kind of a little green face mask, and then kind of goes a little bit a little duller on the back. You can't see it, but he's got some beautiful turquoise underwing. Feather patch, and then this is the female. She looks more like a lime or a lemon kind of on the face, but about the identical size. So this is the longest ongoing study of any wild parrot. That was true when I started there 15 years ago, and it's still true today. So we actually have a crew on the ground right now. They were sending me some pictures this morning. So this is the 31st consecutive year, so we never missed a year. And this is really important because we want to know sort of who's related to who. So now when I walk around the ranch, because over 8,000 individuals over the last 31 years have been given unique color band combinations, when I walk around the ranch with a telescope, I can tell who's the first aunt and the second cousin and the great-grandmother and really cool things like that of course exist in all wild populations, but we just oftentimes don't know who is who, right? And so that makes it difficult for us to sort of make sense of things sometimes. So anyway, over that time, over 3,000 nests have been documented and studied, containing, I think that's closer to 18,000 eggs now. I mentioned the 8,000 individuals. When the field assistants are sort of done with their early morning daily chores, they go around with a telescope and try and identify as many individuals as they can. And that, little by little, gives us a bunch of different information. We little by little figure out who lives longer, how long they live in general, how productive they are, how many kids they have, who they get in fights with, who are their friends, foes. And actually at the end of the year, that also allows us in an extremely meticulous way to say, hey, there are 373 parrots on the ranch this year. And so those kind of numbers are kind of difficult to come by, right? When we go out and do Christmas bird counts, I mean, we do our best faith effort to quantify the number of individuals of each species. But just to sort of make a statement about how many parrotlets are alive in 2019 on the ranch, it takes us 6 months just to get that one figure. But it's a good figure. We can hang our hat on it. We also go out, I'm here, so obviously I'm not doing it now, but the crew quantifies food production for the parrotlets across 1 kilometer of transects every 15 days during 6 months. So we have a lot of information on food availability every year, how it changes from year to year, and of course daily rainfall and precipitation records. Let's see, did I mess up those dates? Yeah, 2014, sorry, it's 2019. So this is the smallest of the New World parrots. It's really a pocket-sized parrot. You could slip it in your pocket literally. In fact, when we're working with the nestlings and I don't have enough hands, I'll slip one of the parrotlets in my pocket so that it doesn't run away. Never in the pants pocket. But wouldn't do that to the adults. The adults are a little bit more feisty. But a very small parrot, which part of the reason this study has been so successful is its small size, right? Some of the larger parrots, there's no way you would it would just be a gargantuan effort to try and do what we've done. I can by myself I can check the contents of 120 nests in the morning. If you were studying macaws or something, it would be months before you could, check, 20 of them if you're lucky, right? But being small also comes with challenges. They're lightning fast. They're the size and color of a leaf on a green background, so they're quite difficult to see sometimes. In fact, this is here you can see the nest cavity, and then I put an addition on here where I've got cameras and microphones inside there, so we can learn about the kids and they're growing up and everything. And this is actually a light bulb. What do you call it? A flash for a photographer. A National Geographic photographer came down to make quick work of our project. And he failed miserably. But part of the reason is, he had no idea. They're just lightning fast, and again, green on a green background. Anyway, I said, "Oh, you're going to love the project, and there's plenty of light. And I knew photographers needed light, and even still, he wanted to get, the flash, inches away from a wild, free-ranging individual. Not easy to do, right? And so anyway, this is his flash inside here, and he controls it with a remote. But anyway, he was spinning his wheels for a couple of weeks, and I was kind of staying out of his way, and I had my own work to do. And I said, hey, how's it going? Not too well. And he'd been telling us about all the projects, filming lions in the savannah of Africa, and rhinoceroses, elephants, and I was like, so what's the toughest project you ever had? So anybody could take a nice picture of an elephant, right? Given its size. So anyway, they've got their challenges. Like many parrots, parrotlets eat seeds that are kind of, they have to eat seeds essentially every day, and so this means that they have to kind of range over a very far area. They also use, sort of back to the vocalization part, they use vocalizations to help coordinate these movements over large areas to find food, and also to come together as a group to sleep at night. They have a large vocal repertoire that I'm going to talk more about now that again is used for coordinating many of these social functions. So I'm going to talk a lot about contact calls today. Contact calls can be given when perched or in flight. They're often of a short duration, at least in parrotlets, a high frequency or high pitch, and kind of a frequency upsweep. So you can see that the call actually starts down there, but then very, very rapidly goes up. And so I'll let you hear a little example of that. Kind of boring, right? I didn't really want to study it when I first heard it. I wanted to study something more interesting, but my PhD advisor had the good sense to make me stick to that. So if you zoom in, they didn't sound very interesting to us because these little guys are kind of on a different time domain than we are because they're so small and so fast. And so if you actually zoom in, the contact calls are a little bit more interesting than they sound like. And we can, of course, also slow it down sort of more to the human speed. Sorry, I don't know. Could you hear that? Mm-hmm. Sorry, a little low. So yeah, there's sort of more going on there than meets the eye. So we were kind of curious about this, the very fast vocalizations and what sort of why were they so short in duration was not immediately intuitive, but it wasn't immediately obvious to us why. And so we kind of come around to thinking it might be a method of increasing information in the calls without increasing the duration. And I'll talk more about why that might be important in a little bit. So we became interested in individual recognition. So there's the male again at the perch, and you can kind of see some of the turquoise there is usually hidden. Most of it's on the underwing part. And the female, she's actually not mad at him. She's yawning. Looks like she's about to fight him, but she's actually kind of bored and worried about the camera too much. And you can see the little tiny leg bands that help us identify each individual. So anyway, I recorded calls on different days, sat in front of different nest boxes, individually identified individuals, and sort of quantified the acoustic structure, kind of like I just showed you with the 3 different calls, but now we've got a bigger sample size of many, many different individuals. And this is kind of a complicated acoustic analysis, but just briefly, it showed that individuals here color-coded, kind of clustered in different sort of areas of acoustic space, just like you might expect if you said the word Bill and James and Juan and Pepe and Jose. Those all sound a little bit different, which allows us to use them as sort of names. And so we were curious as to whether this might indicate that nice story, but can their friends actually tell the difference? Is kind of a more interesting question. So we did some experiments that I'll explain now. Females are in charge of all the incubation. This is going to be on the test. Now, it's actually an interesting thing in birds. Males, physiologically, they can incubate just as well as females can. And therein lies some of the interesting behaviors that we see in birds. In mammals, the dad, he's a good guy, but as much as he'd like to help, he's never going to produce milk, for example. He's physiologically incapable of doing a lot of the early mothering, right? The same is not true in birds. Birds lay an egg that is essentially an undeveloped embryo. And this is another reason birds have been very important in many types of embryological studies, because you can manipulate, you can do all sorts of things to get to the undeveloped embryo outside of the parent's body. And the same is simply not possible in most animals. Anyway, females take care of all incubation, and so they don't take turns. They're in there, all day and all night, which means the male has to, she's a perfectly good forager, but she can't forage while she's incubating. And so he's kind of got a double duty during during the early parts of breeding. So he's continually, going away, finding food, then coming back, giving it to her, and they work hard all day. So they do this about once an hour. So the male returns to feed the female, and usually announces his arrival with a contact call. And again, she's down inside; you wouldn't know if she was there or not, right? Again, he beep beep, and she sort of magically ascends, and there we sort of started formulating our hypothesis. There's parrots like beep 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 all over the place. How did she know that was hers? Well, it's because of some of the information I just showed you. So these are small birds that are like house sparrows. I mean, they're chatter all around. How in the world does she know this is hers? And of course, if she ascended each time she heard a parrotlet call, that might not be a very good strategy, because it might attract the attention of an individual like this. Almost looks like a devil. Those red eyes, they're beautiful eyes, aren't they? I think I knew that, but until we had a camera set up. This is actually after the National Geographic photographer he didn't fail. He took some amazing pictures, but he had a rough time. He was only there for 2 weeks, and so I set up after he left. I said, well, maybe we could help him out. And so we set up he was putting all this equipment near the nest, and they didn't like it. And so we put up a piece of PVC pipe, like 1 foot from their normal nest, before they'd even taken ownership of the nest box. We kind of knew that a pair was going to nest there. And it had a hole, right? So they were used to that. They love PVC. So they're not scared of PVC.
If you said you knew they were going to nest there, what other bird would be nesting in there if it wasn't a parrot?
Yeah, good question. Saffron finches, brown crested flycatchers that we have here in South Texas actually come up from Mexico to breed here. Not the same race. And straight-billed wood creepers, all nest in there. But we actually knew, because the pair had sort of had ownership of that box earlier in the year, and so we suspected they were going to come back and breed again. And so we set up a kind of a fake nest tube about 1 foot away, and then we waited until they were happy and everything and started breeding, and then we put a camera inside here, so the lens was right here, and they kind of didn't notice and didn't care, because it was sort of part of the environment by then. So that's how we got that picture. So we did a little experiment. Again, the female, the actual nest where the eggs are is down here, so that's where she's going to be incubating, and then we hit a speaker next to it, and we played a recording of her mate's call, but then we tried to trick her by playing a recording of a mate from another nest. Right? And this is what we found. Sample size is a little small, but we essentially we did not manage to trick her. She knew her mate's call and ascended more frequently in response to her mate's call than in response to a male from another nest. So we took this as evidence that that these contact calls function as a type of vocal signature. Some people say names, gets the point across a little bit more, a little contentious. Some of the psychologists start pulling out their hair if you say that, because naming is actually an extremely sophisticated behavior. It's really only known in humans, that you would make up a signal and apply it to you, and make up another one and apply it to you. It seems simple to us. We take it for granted. It's the basis of our society, but it's very sophisticated. So dogs can learn their names. They can learn hundreds of words, but at the end of the day, ruff, 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 bow, wow, wow, they can't really deviate from that. Yeah.
These parrotlets, do they have a lifetime mate?
Yes, they do. Most parrots. Good question. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing. The more I study parrots, every time I'm finding all these similarities with humans that are very, very interesting. And again, we both got this sort of off the charts vocal imitative ability, right? Parrots are just Obviously, they're not as good as us, right? They're not going to be going to the moon anytime soon. But considering, they're really considered the most complex of any non-human as far as their vocal imitative abilities go. Lots of debate about, are they just parroting something, right? We actually use it as an adjective to mean you're copying it, but you don't really know what it means. That might be fair in English, but what about in their own language? Do you think that they're just blindly copying it, or do you think it actually means something? That's going to be on the test. Anyway, so now we've got more support for the idea that they are incorporating information into here, and so we think, some of the individual identification is sort of the number of these little frequency modulations. You can see there's kind of, this one has 1, 2, 3, 4. This one has 1, maybe 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, but they're all sort of placed differently. And again, if you slow it down, it's pretty easy to hear. We've shown that the parrotlets have unique contact calls that their social companions can tell the difference, and so we became interested in the source of the uniqueness. Where did it come from? And it could be genetic or it could be learned. So just a qualifier, most individuals, most animals, have sort of unique sounds that allow other individuals of the same species to figure out who they are. This is very important. Again, you need to know who your friends and enemies are, right, in any kind of animal society. And so this is probably very widespread, right? It enables you to identify your mate, your offspring, again, friends and foes. But very few examples of individual uniqueness actually being learned, like, again, we take for granted. So we wanted to find that out. So we began, this is the impetus for putting the cameras inside the nest cavities and beginning to study the sort of unfolding of the vocal repertoire in parrotlets. So you can see they start out pretty humble, look like little aliens, don't really even look like a parrot at that stage. Naked, blind, they don't even have a middle ear cavity. There's no opening, so they're almost like a blank slate. And then of course they start growing up. Most of the early part of development is recurrent. It's pretty obvious that it's about getting food. The kids are in there kind of fighting for food. All the parents are sort of nodding their heads like they know what's going on there, right? And then, kind of interestingly, I didn't even know if we were going to find a contact call in the nest. In some species, like the Berg I mentioned, they actually get their contact calls after they're out of the nest, supposedly. So I was a little nervous, but fortunately we did find it to be widespread that the kids were sort of acquiring their name while they were still in the nest box. And this was just significant to me because it meant we could still study it. Once they fly, things get a lot more complicated. Really hard to find the kids. They fly, green, and they're in the grass, and good luck trying to find them. And so anyway, you can see it kind of starts out pretty noisy, and then it gets more complex. They sort of are better at making sort of tonal sounds, and they're starting to get practice at sort of modulating the frequency. And then the contact call you can see is kind of, they're starting to do what the adults are doing, but they're still not quite as good at it. You can see, again, the adults are very sort of practiced at this, very precise, and even faster, right? So these frequency modulations here, you almost can't see them, are on the order of a millisecond. So this is a sample of contact calls, one from each sibling in a nest. So you might say, okay, if it was just, genetic differences that allowed for this uniqueness, you might think all the siblings would sound the same, right? But actually they are pretty different, even within the nest. They had the same parents, so you know, we were pretty excited about this. It means the sort of signature acquisition occurred pretty early in development, and that we could study it more closely. And so these are data from 16 adults and 25 nestlings, and this is again kind of an acoustic similarity analysis. We took a whole bunch of contact calls from as many of the parents as we could, a whole bunch of contact calls from the nestlings inside the nest, and then compared them to each other. And we found that the nestlings on average tended to acquire their signature contact calls that were like their parents. Now that doesn't mean that they're learning, and this is what we were interested in. Again, parrots are such famous mimics. We suspected they might be learning, but they're also very young, so we didn't know. So we did a little experiment. Actually, before we began the study, we swapped some eggs around, and I'm probably a horrible person now. So we sort of forced adoption on some of the parents, and let some of the parents raise their own kids. And so if it is genetic, you would expect the adopted parents, you know, there'd be a sort of a disconnect between the parents and the kids there, and we found no differences. And so we took this to mean that the parents or the kids are learning their signature contact calls from their parents. So this is actually the first, you know, we've known about parrot vocal imitation forever, right? I mean, almost as long as humans have been around. I bet we've been fascinated by this and knew about it early on. But this is actually the first evidence of a controlled experiment showing vocal imitation in a wild parrot. And again, millions of pet owners are kind of saying, "Give me a break. We know about that a long time ago. My parrot's been insulting me in 3 different languages." It's like, and that's great. But again, it doesn't tell us what they're communicating about with each other, and that's what we're interested in finding out. Sure, it's neat that they can say all these amazing words and everything and make us laugh, but we know it's pretty darn sophisticated, and it just didn't happen by chance. They have to be using it in some similarly sophisticated ways. So yeah, that's the question. What are they talking about to each other? This is we're looking for a nice book to read. Virginia Morell wrote this really nice book and has a chapter on our work with the parrotlets there. But really cool book in that she puts it into context of many other animals. And some of our favorite animals are not surprisingly ones with vocal imitative abilities. Elephants, dolphins, for example, just to give you an example. You know, actually this sort of signature system seems to be more similar, the signature system we see in parrots seems to be almost more similar to what we see in dolphins than in some of the other birds, which is kind of interesting. So bottlenose dolphins can use vocal labels to address each other. Vocal labels, so that is sort of saying names, right? That they're coming up with their own sort of unique sounds and applying it to either individuals or inanimate objects in their environment. And now the evidence, you know, that bottlenose dolphins are actually doing this. Wow, this is difficult work. So what we spend in our 6-month field season, they spend in one morning going out on the boats trying to record dolphins, as you can imagine. Very difficult. So yeah, a lot of people kind of looked at our results and said, "Oh wow, this is really exciting. It means the parents are naming their kids." And we were like, "Ooh, hold on a second." That again, the psychologists are pulling their hair out. That would be another level of sophistication. All we really showed is that the parents sort of, you know, uttered these sounds and that they were more similar to the kids they raised. than the kids in other nests. Now it could be that they named them, and so we've been had some wonderful support from National Geographic to continue with this work. And so that was kind of the beginning of this kind of project that's kind of mushroomed into a monster. So in 2011, we started recording more intensively inside the nest cavities, and the technology had gotten a lot better, so quality of the video is a lot better. And we did this daily during nestling development. So the other stuff I showed you was sort of our first attempt. We recorded like once every 4 or 5 days with some cheap security cameras. But now we've got better stuff, and hard to believe, but 9 years later, we now have 9,000 hours. We've recorded in 100 different nests. Yes.
Have you found that the parents' vocalization, does it have some type of for the nestlings, you know, that they react to their vocalization? Like one does and the other one doesn't?
We need to do that. We haven't gone there
Oh,
yet.
okay.
But that's a good question. That is, that's an important aspect of it. So anyway, I just got so excited sort of with everything I was seeing that I said, let's just dive in and make as much video as we can. And that really wasn't my plan. You know, you don't plan these things. I was excited about it, and you know, we fight to get money every year, and started making the video, but I had no idea that we'd still be, you know, doing it nine years later. So we're tackling again, every year we go back, we sort of have to fight and make arguments for specifically what we're going to do and why it's important and why it's going to change the world, and you know, please give us money. It's a constant battle. Anyway, one of the things in that previous work I showed you, one of the most exciting things to me was we sort of discovered a vocal babbling stage, and surprisingly, this hadn't been identified in parrots before. In fact, I got references in books that say parrots don't babble. And I found that kind of curious because we know vocal babbling is intimately related to vocal imitation. Again, the parents in the audience, kids, are making different sounds and stuff when they're early on, mainly crying, mainly wanting food, sort of like I showed you with the parrotlets. But then at about 6 months, things get more complicated, and they start the gaga goo goo stage, where they're not crying, they're not necessarily asking for food, it's something more complicated. They'll even do it alone, right? So it's not even that they're necessarily trying to interact with somebody else. And then at about 12 months, the baby then all of a sudden sort of disposes of vocal babbling and starts its first human words and never looks back. Just continues to build on the repertoire from there. So we know, it's got something to do with vocal imitation and language. We also know that the dolphins, one of the other, very proficient groups in vocal imitation, have a babbling stage. Songbirds, this has been studied in songbirds for 50 years now. In fact, it's one of the best models of vocal babbling in humans, because we simply can't do the horrible types of experiments that I told you about to babies, right? We can't swap, some kids with one group of parents, and, it's unethical, right? It's not correct. Even if you get volunteers, it still wouldn't be ethical. But, you might still think it was unethical what I did, but we give the parrots a pretty good life. We keep the rain off their head.
Paying their rent.
I'm sorry?
You're paying their rent.
That's right. With these nice condominiums. Anyway, bats, that was kind of a surprise. Bats are also vocal learners, so they're very good have some very sophisticated echolocation abilities, so it's kind of not surprising that they eventually, when people started checking, that they found out that they're quite good, and bats also have a vocal babbling stage. Again, this early stage that leads up to the more complicated vocal imitation phase. As I mentioned, this is essentially unknown in parrots, and anyway, we were making that video from the previous work I was telling you about, and I was coming along to check one of the field assistants, and she was sitting outside with about 400 feet of cable going to the nest cavity and swatting mosquitoes and board, and she had the headphones on, and I just came and asked her, how are things going? She's like, oh, okay. And she's like, the nestlings are singing. What are you talking about? And we've got all these microphones, so it's easy to confuse. You don't know the birds real well. It's easy to confuse them with maybe something else outside. And I said, well, are the parents inside there? Like, no. And I'm like, well, can I see? And when I heard it, I was like, wow, this is big. Still trying to prove that it's big, but I was very excited when I saw it, because it doesn't make sense that they wouldn't have a vocal babbling stage. Again, if you get into the neurobiology of it, there's every reason to suspect that they would have it. And again, babbling used to kind of, the linguists used to kind of blow it off. And babbling actually means your, lips are moving, sounds coming out, but it doesn't mean anything, right? Not anymore. When people started studying it, they found that, scientists have found that babies with a very diverse and robust babbling repertoire, that can cascade into sort of cognitive abilities later in life, and ones that might be a bit more subdued and kind of a borier repertoire might have cognitive difficulties later in life. So a lot of interest in this stage and what's going on. It's sort of, it's opening the door, it's doing something inside the brain that's allowing the individual to sort of take the next step. So in parrotlets, this occurs a few days before they fly. So one of the questions we're interested in, sort of a lot of literature that indicates that early social interactions are very important to cognitive development. In fact, this is actually one of the really interesting things about humans. Again, the more I study parrots, the more I sort of come back to humans. I just read books about this really, but a chimpanzee, for example, the newborn, I mean, you're gonna have to kill the mother if you want to grab the newborn, right? She will not give it up to anybody, right? And a human mother, almost as soon as she gives birth, she's like, Mom, deal with this, right? And not just mom. Aunts, sisters, even uncles, daughters, sons, and we know from anthropological studies that this is just not something unique to one culture. That it's about the human experience. A lot of societies, they're really excited when there's a newborn, even if they're unrelated, and the kid gets sort of passed around very early on. And granted, what the mother has been through, it could only work if she has help, right? It's not going to work if she's on her own. A lot of really famous studies sort of pointing to early social interactions as sort of being very important for normal cognitive development in a particular species. It's not going to happen in just every species. Anyway, this is an example of the babbling repertoire. When I saw it, I couldn't believe it, because I showed you that sort of simplified look at vocal development, and it was some kind of boring food begging calls, the contact call that I thought was really cool, but there wasn't a whole lot more, And I was like, okay, they're young, makes sense. And then all of a sudden we saw this. They were capable of much more than they were leading on. So anyway, Rory Eggleston is a graduate student in my lab, and she's been studying the babbling repertoire, so she goes through video. If anybody's having trouble sleeping at night, I've got 9,000 hours of video that I can lend you. But anyway, she's been going through the video very meticulously with undergrads as well in the biology department, identifying the bouts of vocal babbling, extracting them, and then doing spectrographic analysis. Some of you might know Caleb. Sorry, I forgot to put his name on there. Caleb Arellano is also a graduate student in my lab. He actually graduated earlier this year, and so he was ahead of Rory. And he sort of took a different but related question. He looked at the actual social interactions. So, in the previous slide, I sort of suggested, well, we've got this neat variation in the number of siblings, and they're doing this vocal babbling. We can look for correlations. But it wouldn't necessarily mean that there were necessarily more social interactions or more social bonds in a large family as opposed to a small family. And so Caleb actually went through the video and quantified every time they sort of interacted with each other. And they usually did this by cleaning each other's feathers, which is a very important adult behavior. Now, where did they learn that? We don't. Obviously it could be from the parents, maybe it's just hardwired inside of them or something. Really cool study, and they also, they kind of fake feed, and we kind of call it fake preening. And another way to articulate it is that it's a play behavior. And so we also know that play behavior is extremely important for cognitive development, especially in juveniles. And actually all these behaviors, we could actually refer to them as play behaviors, and that they don't seem to be, fulfilling an immediate function, but everybody's doing it. It must be important. It must be doing something. It must be part of the equation. I kind of forgot to mention, but we have this, now I told you we've been recording in 100 nests now, so we have an amazing range of sample sizes. So we can have up to 11 nestlings in one nest. It's kind of crazy, chaotic. And but then it could go all the way down to 4. And of course, if there's an accident with some of the eggs, we could actually go down to 1 or none. None would be very interesting to study. But actually, I got excited about this because we did. A cow went and rammed into one of the nest tubes one day. They like to scratch their backs on the perches. I don't know, fighting or something, but they knocked down one of the tubes and the eggs went rolling out, and 3 of them went into the recycle, what you guys would call a recycle, right? And 1 egg remained, and so the field assistant discovered it, put it back in the egg, and so we had a sort of a natural experiment where we just had 1 nestling without any siblings. Boy, was she weird, probably depressed. So spent most of the day with her head buried inside the sawdust. Would refuse food from parents. No parent that in their right mind would refuse food, right? They're crazy begging for food every time the parents come. And this one's like, no, I don't want to eat. And she sticks her head out. And so anyway, that got me excited. I was like, we're going to find something. I don't know what we're going to find, but we're going to find something. Anyway, Caleb did a really nice job. So this is these are 3 different nests with 4 nestlings each. So each nestling had 3 siblings. These are 3 different nests with 6 nestlings. So each one had 5 different siblings. And these are 3 different nests with 8 siblings. So each nestling had 7 different siblings. And the connecting line tells you that they interacted with another individual, right? So these 2 individuals interacted, and so forth. Anyway, it seems like kind of a dumb question, but we do know now that it's not something unrelated to the number of siblings, but that life is more complicated in these larger broods. And again, people from large families are probably nodding their head again. Yes.
It looks like, and maybe I'm interpreting it wrong, but in some of the nests, like let's say the most simplistic ones, the ones on top, that some didn't of the siblings didn't communicate at all.
Yeah.
And one would communicate with the other, but that one would never communicate back to that one.
That's right. That's right.
Weird.
Yeah. And maybe it's just our sample size, right? I mean, we didn't necessarily quantify everything. We only recorded a couple hours each day. So we have to take that with a grain of salt a little bit. But you're right. But to me, the kind of the take-home message is that they're sort of equipped to exploit whatever you give to them in a social sense. And again, this might not seem like that big of a deal, kind of a no-brainer to us, right? If you sit one of us in a kindergarten classroom or something with 4 kids or 8 kids or 16 kids, where you'll probably see something similar. But we've actually somebody asked early on, are other species nesting in your nest boxes? As if I didn't have enough video, we started recording in 3 other species, just as kind of a side project. And boy, is it boring. They don't really interact. These are all songbirds. One of them's a vocal learner, and 2 aren't. But boy, is it boring. I mean, they're like little, they're sort of hidden in there, and they almost look like a painting, like the little baby alligators there. And the parents come, and then almost like a spring, boom, the mouth goes open, right? And these bright colored mouths, and they'll beg like crazy. And the second the parents are gone, boom, it's like a switch went off, right? And they really don't interact with each other. We were kind of fixated early on in this project with the parent-offspring interactions. The first part of it, I told you about that. And we were kind of missing all the interim stuff, and we realized, hey, they're spending way more time with their siblings than they are with their parents, right? And again, parents in the audience, sure, you try and teach your kids as much as you want, but they're going to go off to school and college, and they're going to be influenced just as much by who they interact with. So anyway, thought that was kind of cool. I'll just show you. Kind of a typical. So those are bird sounds. This is totally quiet inside there. These are bird sounds from outside. But this really kind of impresses me. So there, I don't know if that's the jugular or what, but he's getting awfully close to like ripping the vein out of his own sibling. But the impressive thing is, first of all, he doesn't. And this one, now look, I mean, he's almost like on his eye with his bill. Would you trust somebody to sort of, pick out your eyelashes? Not anybody, right? You would have to have quite a bit of trust in that other individual. And again, this is what psychologists kind of think is going on. When the analogy I gave when the new mother handed off her infant, it's because she trusted her mother or her daughter or her aunt or her great grandmother, right, or her grandmother. But also, I also told you about the chimpanzees that they will not give up their newborn. No way, not even to another chimpanzee, right? It's not just the mother. If you manage to take the newborn away, the newborn will be as in bad a shape as the mom. They are just destroyed if they're separated, right? And we know physiologically this is true. All sorts of crazy things happen. It doesn't happen to us. We trust, again, our close family members and our friends, but the baby does too. Babies kind of like it. And that's kind of interesting, and I think it's pretty human too. It's pretty much there's something about us where people say we're sort of wired for this sociality, and maybe we are, maybe we're not. Maybe early experience is wiring us for it, right? So getting passed around, being in a big family, a loving family, right? You feel like somebody's got your back, right? And that's really important. And if 15 people have your back, man, you're on a good route. So, how are we doing on time?
20 more minutes.
Oh no. You guys doing okay? You need to get up and stand up. I haven't even talked about flight. What's going on? I was going to tell you about flight, right? Well, it's about to come. So, anyway. I mentioned before the ability to imitate vocalizations is only known from a handful of taxa. They tend to be some of the more amazing animals on Earth in some ways. Killer whales and dolphins I talked about. Elephants also have vocal learning. I talked about the bats. You birders, of course, love hummingbirds, I know. I love parrots. Birders also love songbirds, and of course, humans as well. We still don't really have, this is kind of a weird distribution. I'm showing you almost all of it. Dogs don't have it, chimpanzees don't have it, gorillas don't have it. So very sophisticated primates don't have it, and we're all of a sudden off the charts. This makes up more than half the birds in the world, but that also means half the birds in the world can't do it. The whales and so forth. Anyway, we don't have a real good explanation for why this is distributed the way it is. So I hope I don't lose you here. I might just skip over this, but well, let's go. Now I'm going to try and make the leap to flight. This is kind of dogma. So how and when behaviors emerge during development can provide clues to the origin of these things. And again, still a heated debate about why and where human speech came about. A lot of disagreement about that. And so anyway, this is the leg, or I should say the tarsus. So we take measurements of this in the adults and the nestlings. And sorry, I should have days here. So this is days post-hatch. You can see as they're out of the egg, the tarsus is growing in a very predictable way until about 10 days. At 10 days, it attains its adult size, and then you can see, sort of regardless of age, it doesn't change, right? Which we would take to mean that, okay, it developed at 10 days, that particular trait. This is now wing length or wing chord. Okay, so kind of from here to the edge of the primaries. And again, nestling age at the bottom. This one is almost a perfectly straight line, right? It doesn't really show any hint of flattening off at the top. And so it probably means it got to flatten off eventually, right? So it probably means they don't have their flight quite entirely developed by the time they leave the nest, but it's getting pretty close. So the adult is right around here. Okay? So they're almost about 80. So this idea that development and behavior and evolution are linked would sort of say, this kind of indicates that the individual can walk. So if it's got its adult foot by 10 days, it probably means it can stand up and walk by 10 days. And if it still doesn't have its adult plumage, especially the flight feathers, by 30 days, it probably means it's just barely getting close to attaining flight. And we know that bipedal walking evolved long before flight. So flapping flight is a highly specialized form of locomotion, whereas the dinosaurs had well-developed bipedal locomotion long before birds came on the scene. So very well known. This is another thing that again, never cease to be impressed by parrots. Another weird thing about us as humans is exactly what I'm doing right now, standing up on two legs. If you think about it, how many mammals, okay, this is going to be on the test, how many mammals have bipedal locomotion that you can think of? It seems like such a common thing, we take it for granted, but when you look around the world, what groups have it? Kangaroos, kind of not quite what we have, in fact not at all what we have. And there's also a kangaroo mouse, and I think that's it, in mammals. In birds, it's like a no-brainer. Everybody can do it. And it's actually quite sophisticated. Again, we kind of take it for granted, but it's something very unique about us. So Homo erectus was named for its ability to stand up, right? Sure, chimpanzees and gorillas can stand up, but if a lion's chasing them, they're going down on all fours. No way are they going to run, And if a lion's chasing us, no way are we going down on all fours. Right? It'll be the end of us. Unless, of course, we're a little baby, right? So this really fascinates me. I mentioned vocal babbling kicks in humans at about 6 months and ends fairly abruptly at about 12 months. Guess what happens at 12 months?
You start walking.
Take your first step. Almost right around one thing kind of ends. This mysterious babbling phase ends abruptly with us standing up, and now and uttering our first sort of adult words. And boy, if you want to talk about two things that make us human, it's this and this, and they happen at almost precisely the same time. I think that's fascinating. So I'm going to actually skip over this for a second. So the reason I gave you that little spiel there is when I was reviewing the video, I noticed so this is the dad. You can see he's all about work, right? He's pretty serious. Whereas the kid looks like, she kind of wants to play, right? That's the daughter. And I noticed that, very interested in these contact calls. And I noticed in the video that they were kind of doing wing flaps as they were ascending, chasing the parents, and giving contact calls at the same time. And I thought this was pretty interesting because there was, I guess I have to go back now, there's this sort of juvenile behavior that's been given quite a bit of attention, wing-assisted incline running, and it's sort of in baby birds, but also in birds that don't have flight. They use their wing strokes sort of to kind of become like Spider-Man almost. So it allows them to go up vertical inclines, basically. It could be tree trunks, cliff faces, running from a predator or something. They sort of are running and clawing at the tree or the cliff face. And then they've actually done quite a bit of work on this, and they use this wing flap that is like flight, but the animal doesn't have flight, so it's not flight, it's something else. Anyway, they use it, and it sort of creates pressure on the substrate that allows them to kind of be like Spider-Man. In fact, this actually shows that they can actually go upside down. It's so effective. And so there's one theory that this is how flight evolved in birds, is that birds were kind of anyway. So I knew there was all this attention, and we just found out this stuff about the contact call, and then I'm seeing this wing stroke that is not about flight because the individual can't fly yet. We know that, and so I see the two things kind of connected at the hip. Anyway, that got me kind of interested. And kind of went off on a 10-year tangent. Anyway, this kind of shows, so you see the kind of wing strokes and the contact call are kind of synced there. So those are all nestlings there. This is the oldest one. She's about to fledge. The other siblings are younger. Okay. Just talk a little bit about, are you going to stand up when I go over time? We got to leave enough time for the exam, right?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so this started getting us interested in adult flight. We felt like we sort of needed to know what the adults were doing. Not all birds. This is actually kind of something curious that's not well known, but some birds have undulating flight. Woodpeckers are kind of famous for it. Anybody know any other species that have undulating flight? You might have seen. Some of the warblers have it. It seems like some of the smaller birds have it. Woodpeckers are kind of an exception. Anyway, it's kind of a curious flight pattern. And so I was curious about how they synced, kind of what we were seeing the nestlings do at the early stage. How do they synchronize their calls with their flight styles? And so we found that the calls were invariably synchronized with the flapping phase. I was kind of thinking it might get in the way or something. but an alternative hypothesis is that it's actually a way of amplifying the call. Because this is probably when most of the exhalation phase of the respiratory cycle occurs. And we need, so when I'm talking right now, I'm pushing air out of my lungs. In most animals, it's that way. There's a few exceptions. So of West Africa is actually pulling air in, but it's kind of rare. And in birds as well. Most of everything we're hearing is birds pushing air out. And so we know enough about flight that we could sort of predict that this might be happening. Oh, well, I better wind things up. I just thought I'd show you, for you non-believers, the air sacs. So you can see they almost, so here's the lung, but you can see they almost take up, it's a little bit of an optical illusion because we're not seeing the whole bird, but they almost take up, you know, an entire part of the inside of the bird. I'm gonna again skip over some of this, but this is kind of cool. I'll explain this to you. So again, we wanted to find out. That was kind of theoretical, what I showed you before. Now we wanted to find out if the actual wing stroke is coordinated with vocal production. Might seem kind of silly. Turned out to be really hard to figure out, and so. You know, it's funny, I kind of stumbled upon this question and I was like, wow, I can't believe nobody's answered this yet. And 10 years later, I'm like, now I know why nobody's done it. Anyway, we set up an acoustic microphone array. So there's 4 microphones and they're all evenly spaced and they're all wired into a recorder. And so they're all picking up the signal at exactly the same time. And so if a bird flies by, I photoshopped this in, by the way. But if a bird is flying by, depending on how far it is from the microphones, we can then put the sound files in a computer. We give them a map of the microphones, and it tells us within a centimeter squared of where the individual was at the precise moment it vocalized. Pretty cool. This is how we used to shoot out submarines. Anyway, that just gives you an idea. Again, if the bird is right here, you know, maybe the sound is going to arrive to these 2 microphones at about the same time, but it'll take, you know, a few milliseconds more to get there, and the software figures it out for you. Acoustic triangulation. Anyway, just give you an example. Yeah, sorry, a little hard to hear, but that was, and this is one of the microphones, and there's the other one. So the one tall one, that allowed us to sort of do it in 3 dimensions. So the 3 equal ones allowed us to sort of plot it on a map, but then that tall one allowed us to say how far, you know, it was up off the ground when it vocalized. Okay, so why was that exciting? Because this is kind of the magic of echolocation. So we've known about this since World War II almost. The echolocating bats, boy, the Halloween mask people not gotten onto this yet. I mean, isn't this amazing? I mean, this is not a joke. This is just an amazing group of animals. Again, we don't hear most of what they're doing because it's ultrasonic, right? It's out of our hearing range. And there's a reason. So this is actually the largest group of mammals with vocal learning, but just hasn't been studied as much as the others. The only mammals with real flapping flight, where you can actually get off the ground from a standstill. For echolocation to work, the wavelength of the sound has to be extremely small so that they can bounce it off of a very small object that's flying around, a moth in complete darkness. I mean, this is pretty amazing what bats can do. And because small wavelengths are synonymous with high frequencies, this is why they're ultra frequency, because they have to choose these very high frequencies because those have very short wavelengths. So You know, the reason you can hear your echo when you're in a mountain valley is because the wavelength of your voice is smaller than the mountain. And that's why we sort of only hear those echoes when we're up against areas that are very big, right? Everything else in our environment, our waves will kind of go around it, right? In the forest, for example, or in the trees. Now the problem with echolocation is those really high frequencies are next to impossible to propagate, to move them through the environment because they lose energy so quickly. And so the only way this could have happened is that bats figured out that they could use the expiratory pressure. This is really energy lost, right? You know, when you're flapping your wings like that, the air that comes out is exhaust, right? Like the exhaust from your car. You're not doing anything with the exhaust. It's gone. It's off into the environment. No longer yours. You paid for it, but it's gone. And so bats figured out that if they sync the wing stroke with the vocalization, they would have enough power to propagate those really high frequency sounds far enough to where they could bounce them off the insect and get them back to them. So pretty amazing. And the whole mechanics of it really depends on syncing vocal production with the power stroke. And so I think I should probably stop there, but that's why I was kind of excited. It seemed like kind of a silly question, this, you know, the parentlet syncing the call with the power stroke, but I thought it was pretty important just because what we know about bats, again, most birds aren't echolocating, so then the question is, what are they doing with this? So stay tuned.